Hello and welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. Today we'll be speaking to Hamza Moeen, the inspiration behind ManiacMuslim.com. We'll also be looking at the French President Nicolas Sarkozy's comments on the burqa, and we'll be taking a look at a verse from the Quran. We'll start with the verse. With me is Brother Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now, the verse we're dealing with is from Surah 10. It's verse 99. Would you like to introduce the verse for us?
Yeah, it says in Arabic, لو شاء الله لآمن من في الأرض كلهم جميعا أفأنت تكره الناس حتى يكونوا مؤمنين. If God willed, everyone on earth altogether would have believed. Are you then going to force people to make them believers? Mm-hmm. It seems to be a refrain to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he's not to use force or compulsion or any, not that he was even contemplating this,
okay.
But perhaps he was trying too hard to convert people, especially in the early days when he just began receiving the message, and he is filled with this tremendous sense of responsibility that he's got to convey this message to others to save them from falling into the hellfire. And God assures him that it's not for him to worry, it's not for him to try more than a reasonable amount. Because after all, if God willed, everyone would have believed. He could have fixed the minds of everyone such that they would definitely turn out to be believers. Mm-hmm. But he's left it such. He has given people the freedom of thought and the freedom of choice. So some will choose to be believers, some will choose to remain non-believers. And there is not much that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, could do about that.
Mm-hmm. But then the next verse goes on to say, well, no one can believe except by the will of God. So that means that God seemed to have it in his plan that, not everybody would believe. Or not everyone would become Muslims.
Yes, we can put that three ways. You see, you can say, suppose we say God willed everyone to believe. Mm-hmm. That's statement one. Let's think of statement two. God willed everyone not to believe. Mm-hmm. And let's think of statement three. God willed it such that people will have the freedom to choose to believe, such that some will choose to believe and some will choose not to believe. So statement three is the correct description of God's plan.
Okay, although it doesn't say that exactly in the verse. It seems to be an extrapolation.
Yes, and that extrapolation comes from reading the entire Quran together and in understanding it in a reasonable manner. The Quran switches between the action of God and the action of human beings. So if God willed, everyone will be a believer. At the same time, no one can be a believer except by the will of God. But notice that the verse 100 says that God will pile dirty things or evil upon or unclean things upon those people who do not use their intellect. So when we read a verse like that, we should understand that it's not godly for God to pile filth upon people, because he is continuously telling people to avoid filth, to shun. There's a very thing which is called rijz in the Quran, evil things and everything that is foul and unholy. So how would he then just simply arbitrarily pile the same thing on people? What we should understand then from the verse is that you have two sides of the same coin. One is the action of God guiding people towards that which is good. The other is the action of the person choosing that which is good. Now, if a person chooses that which is bad, then that person is in fact piling the filth on himself or herself. So that's judging the issue from the human point of view. But since God is in control of all affairs, you may as well say that God is doing the same thing. Okay. That's just looking at it from the point of view of God's ultimate power and control over all things. So the verse does here what it does in many other places. It switches between the human perspective and the divine perspective.
And there's a whole other part, which is the person who advises or counsels or invites to the way of God.
Yes, if you wanted to describe everything from the divine point of view, you would say God is doing everything. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to describe everything from a human point of view, you would describe it from all of the natural causes. Things do things, and people do things. So a person chooses to go towards the right path. You can say he guided himself, or you can say that God guided him, or you can say that the callers to Islam guided him towards Islam.
Okay.
A person chooses the wrong path. You can say the person misguided himself. You can say the devil misguided him, and you can also say that God led him up the wrong path. But you should never understand that God somehow arbitrarily takes a good person and then throws him into destruction. God doesn't do that. It's not godly for him to do that, and he wouldn't do that. In fact, he continues to plead with us to avoid the wrong path. But if a person does choose deliberately to go on the wrong path, that person ends up in the fire. That person ends up in perdition and destruction. That person ends up in filth and all kinds of evil things. So you can describe it from the point of view of the action of that person, or you can say, ultimately, God led this person down the wrong path.
All right. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we will look at the French president's comments on the burqa.